Hi everybody, welcome to week 14. Hope everyone's enjoying this very, very, very warm mid-November day. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of the modules that you'll be doing for this week, modules 25 and 26. So the first one, we are going to be starting our discussion of social movements of the 1960s and 1970s. So these movements are ones that have their roots in the civil rights protests of the 50s and early 60s, but they start to articulate different demands, different methodologies, different messages than the activists were in the civil rights movement. They tend to be more radical, and their demands are a little bit more complicated, I would say, than the ones that we were discussing in terms of civil rights, desegregation, and integration. So, for example, I'm going to be talking a lot in Module 25 in the slides about this idea of self-determination versus the idea of self-help. I wanted to just give a brief overview of that because it's kind of a complicated distinction. So in terms of self-help, that's the kind of the language that Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs were using, wanting to give people, poor people, a hand up, not a hand out, like how to help them help themselves to better their communities and better their lives. It was viewed as mostly an individual effort to really fully integrate into the American citizenry. So what can we do to get people the best opportunities that we can so that they can take advantage of all that the U.S. has to offer? It's kind of the same kind of language as the civil rights movement organizers were using, wanting access to the voting booth, for example, or access to the best public schools. These things were designed to help people to be full American citizens. In the late 60s and 70s, we really see a different demand, and people are framing their concerns not just in wanting to integrate into an existing U.S. society, but really wanting to change what that U.S. society looked like in general. So the language of self-determination was much more about community control over people, resources, services. So for example, Black communities having a real problem with the police and how they were treated by the police. So wanting to sort of take control over the safety of their own neighborhoods, wanting to define authority or define and assert authority and control over safety. Wanting to promote Black-owned businesses and kind of defining what the community looked like. So it didn't just look like integrating into the United States, but it was all about really having a real say in what inclusion actually looked like. Self-determination is the language that folks were using in terms of the Vietnam War as well. So we're going to transition into Module 26, which is all about the war. I'll give you an overview of the war itself, why we were there in Vietnam, and then look a little at the anti-war protest movement. Pretty much all of the social movements we'll be talking about this week and next week had an anti-war platform as well. So the Vietnam War really is kind of sandwiched in this discussion of social movements, and I felt like it definitely deserves its own module because there's so much to talk about. But some of the overlap is the way that people were talking about self-determination. So Vietnamese freedom fighters or communist Vietnamese who were fighting for ownership of their country or control of their country, obviously we're talking about a language of self-determination, wanting to assert ownership over their nation and determine, the direction that it was taking. Folks in the U.S. who were part of these social movements also saw a parallel between their own demands for community control, power in their communities, and the demands that the Vietnamese were making. So there is this similarity in the language that they asserted. So yeah, anyway, we're going to be talking about all that. In Module 25, we'll be getting into Black Power, the Chicano movement. We'll talk a little bit about the Third World Liberation Movement, and then we will get into Vietnam, the overview of the war, more about the experiences of soldiers and veterans, and then we'll talk about anti-war protest movement as well. Then when we come back next week, we're going to be talking about part 2 of the social movements of the 60s and 70s. So we're going to get into so many more things. Feminist movement, the American Indian movement, environmentalism. This period is really just an explosion of activism. which leads me to my introduction to your last primary source analysis project, which is the Instagram posts. I'll be posting a detailed prompt about what I expect for that project by the end of today. So if you're watching this past Monday, the 18th, then you'll already have the prompt available on the homepage on Canvas. If you're watching this on Monday, it will be up by tonight. But basically, I want you to go in detail about one of these movements that I'm mentioning in these modules. There's just so much to say, and there's not enough space to say it. So you'll have a chance to really get into some more analysis of the ones that you find most intriguing to you. Yeah, I will also be posting the prompt for the last extra credit assignment because we're really approaching the end of our course. Thank you all for submitting your iSearch papers. I will be grading those this week, getting you some feedback because you're going to be using the same sources that you found for those papers to make your podcasts. I've already been talking now for 6 minutes, so I'm going to go. But I wish you all a very, very happy week as we lead into Thanksgiving. We're going to get a little break pretty soon, so just stay strong, and I will talk to you soon. Okay, thank you. Bye.